What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton has been driving a defective car without knowing during the first races with Ferrari? And what Frédéric Vasseur discovered it and decided to hide it into the world? What happened within Ferrari can be one of the greatest technical scandals in recent years. The arrival of Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari in 2025 was one of the most resonant movements in the recent history of Formula One. A 7-time world champion leaving Mercedes behind, his house for more than a decade, to assume the challenge of returning Ferrari to the top. From the first moment, this story was loaded with symbolism, pressure, and an epic narrative. But the track showed a diametrically opposite reality. From the preseason tests in Bahrain, alarm signals were glimpsed. Although the SF25 showed good times in short simulations, its behavior in long batches was erratic, inconsistent. Many blamed him for the typical test conditions or a process of adapting Hamilton, but the pilot himself dropped into interviews that something did not finish being well with the car, although without specifying. The alarms began to sound more strongly in Australia, where Hamilton could barely scratch a point and was visibly frustrated. What should have been a celebration, its red debut, became an exercise of survival. The difficulties were not limited to a lack of speed. There was a clear disconnection between the pilot and the machine. The car did not respond to Hamilton's inputs, which seemed to be constantly fighting to keep it within the limits of acceptable performance. This pattern was repeated in China, where the British was disqualified by abnormal wear in the lower plate of his car, unequivocal symptom that the car was being forced to shoot too low. A technical decision taken in a desperate attempt to find aerodynamic load. And then the breakdown came, the Spain Grand Prix. There, Hamilton broke his usual diplomacy in front of the media and released a phrase that resonated throughout the paddock. "This is the worst car I've ever driven." Such a hard statement not only for the forcefulness of language, but for what it implies coming from someone who has competed with cars that were once authentic nightmares. Behind that sentence there was an accumulation of frustrations, disappointment, and an increasingly clear sensation that the problem was not adaptation, not even strategy, but structural. Ferrari's environment also began to show signs of discontent. Frédéric Vasseur looked more serious than usual, Charles Leclerc avoided ruling on the performance of the car, and the team's communication became hermetic. Despite this, rumors began to leak. Stiffness failures in the chassis, correlation problems between the wind tunnel and the track, inconsistencies in telemetry. The SF25, which in simulators was promising, on the track it was unpredictable. And so, what should be a season of redemption was rapidly transformed into a technical and emotional nightmare. Because when a Lewis Hamilton caliber pilot begins to doubt his car, his team, and his own ability to make a difference, the problem is no longer only mechanical. It is human, it is deep, and it is urgent. What Frédéric Vasseur and Ferrari's technical team discovered after the Canada Grand Prix was as revealing as alarming. During a post-carrier analysis in Maranello, engineers identified that the problem was not a minor adjustment, nor a deviation in the career setup. It was a structural weakness deeply integrated in the design of the SF25. Specifically, a critical incompatibility between the pull rod-type rear suspension and the new architecture of the compact gearbox that Ferrari introduced this season. This design, in theory, should reduce weight and improve the efficiency of the propeller set, but in practice it generated a devastating side effect: the lack of structural stiffness on the rear axle. This weakness prevented the car operates in its ideal aerodynamic window. In other words, engineers could not configure the car low enough to maximize aerodynamic load, because in doing so, the flat background began to touch the ground violently, compromising the integrity of the car. This phenomenon, known as extreme bottoming, not only reduced speed in fast curves, one of the key points to compete against McLaren and Red Bull, but also caused a sudden loss of aerodynamic load, generating an unstable car, difficult to predict and extremely aggressive with rear tires. The irregular wear that this produced in soft rubber was catastrophic in long batches. And that explained why Hamilton seemed to have a competitive rhythm in classification, but then completely vanished in the race. The disqualification suffered in China was only a public demonstration of a much larger problem. The FIA detected that the lower plate of Hamilton SF25 had worn below the regulatory minimum. This was a direct consequence of the team attempt to adjust the car as low as possible to recover aerodynamic load, sacrificing everything else, including the legality of the design. It was a desperate maneuver, driven by the pressure of results, but that highlighted that Ferrari did not have a real solution to the problem. In addition, the correlation analysis between the wind tunnel, the simulator, and the data on the track revealed a worrying disconnection. The engineers realized that the results obtained in the simulated environment did not translate into real improvements in the circuit. This led the technical team to reassess the complete SF25 development flow, from the initial simulations to track validation. For Hamilton, it was the moment in which everything made sense. His discomfort at the wheel, his constant struggle with the rear of the car, and that feeling that, no matter how much his driving style adjusted, the car was still not responded. But this is where the situation took an even more delicate turn. Vasseur, aware of the media and psychological impact that this information could have, made a radical decision. He instructed both Hamilton and Leclerc not to speak publicly about the technical problem. This order of silence, far from protecting the team, generated an internal tension that became evident in the interviews. Both pilots began using ambiguous phrases, to avoid commenting on the behavior of the car, to close answers when journalists asked about the adjustments or the sensation in the race. Body language, however, said much more than words. The discovery of the structural failure in the SF25 was not just a technical setback. It was a turning point that shook the foundations of the Ferrari-Hamilton project. When a pilot like Lewis, who has won everything and has gone through all possible stages of success and frustration, loses faith in his work tool, the consequences go far beyond what is seen in the position table. We are talking about one of the most demanding and perfectionist athletes on the planet, competing in the decline of his career, with a legacy to protect and a motivation that only feeds on specific results. From the moment the problem was hidden, Hamilton stopped feeling part of the process. The silence imposed by the team not only prevented him from giving explanations to the media or their fans, but also isolated it from the decision-making core. Internally, the idea that Ferrari had underestimated the impact of his signing began to circulate, thinking it was enough to have the champion in the garage to solve years of technical deficiencies. But the reality was another. Without a competitive car, not even Hamilton's experience and talent can reverse the situation. This de-synchronization was reflected in the paddock. While McLaren continued to consolidate his technical hegemony and Red Bull tried to stop his fall, Ferrari was trapped in an internal struggle between what promised to be and what he really was. The engineers began to divide between those who wanted to completely redesign the suspension and those who defended the original platform, adjusting only the peripheral elements. The technical meetings became tense, the development cycles slowed down, and each decision seemed to be too late. For Hamilton, the situation became a war against time. He knows that each race wasted with a limited car is a lost opportunity to return to the top. The most worrying thing is that, according to sources close to the team, there have already been private conversations where the British pilot has expressed his frustration not only for the car, but for Ferrari's internal management. Its surroundings already begin to filter that, if the team does not react quickly, there could be a break in the spirit of collaboration that had been built since its arrival. And in the meantime, the championship does not expect. Every weekend without solutions represents a bleeding of points in the World Cup of Builders and a loss of credibility before their rivals. The pressure of the sponsors, of the Italian media, of the tifosi, everything accumulates as a dense cloud over Maranello. In this context, Ferrari should not only correct a technical problem, it must demonstrate that it is a structure capable of responding quickly, protecting their pilots, and evolving in the midst of chaos. The big question is whether this blow is a sign that Ferrari has not yet learned from his historical mistakes. Are Vasseur ready to break the internal dynamics that have stopped the team in previous years? Will Hamilton have enough patience to expect a transformation that, so far, only exists in speeches? The next races will be decisive. Ferrari must decide whether to redesign the SF25 completely or continue patching a concept that has already shown its limits. Hamilton, meanwhile, must decide whether this is the place where you can write your last big chapter, or if you have made the greatest mistake of your career. What has happened with the SF25 is not simply a design problem, it is a clear manifestation of the unheeded wounds that Ferrari has dragged for years. The inability of the team to offer Hamilton a machine worthy of its talent reflects a disconnection between ambition and execution. The signing of the most successful pilot of the modern era was a declaration of intentions. To return to the top, cut the doubts and project a new era of domain. But instead, he has evidenced that Ferrari is still trapped in a fight with himself, between his legacy and his present. And this is where this case becomes more than a technical story. It is a warning for all teams that dream of success only signing names. Because the championships are not won with contracts, they win coherence, transparency, and a solid structure. Ferrari has talent in its ranks, has a budget, has resources. But if you do not first solve your internal communication crises, its technical leadership problems, and its aversion to deep structural change, No star can change its destiny. Hamilton, meanwhile, is not here to build a long-term project from scratch. He is here to win. And each race with a limited car is a blow to its legacy, but also a window that closes. Time is not on his side and he knows. Therefore, the true battle will not be just on the track. It will be within the team itself, between conformism and ambition, between the old Ferrari of the excuses and the new Ferrari that he came to lead. And now the question is yours. Do you think Ferrari is willing to publicly recognize his mistakes and redesign the SF25 from scratch to save this season? Or are we witnessing the beginning of a disappointment that will forever mark the final stage of Lewis Hamilton in Formula One?